Hashirama was an excitable man with a boisterous personality. He loved meeting new people, having friendly competitions, and gambling. Headstrong and often impulsive, it fell to others, such as his brother, Tobirama, to be more responsible or realistic about things that Hashirama had gotten carried away with. When taken down in this way, or even when simply presented with information that troubled him, Hashirama could do a near immediate about-face, going from laughing to sulking. These moping periods were typically brief though, and he'd quickly go back to his usual high-spirited nature. Later generations upon meeting him tended to remark that neither extremes of his personality were very fitting for a man called the god of shinobi. Despite the first impression he may give, Hashirama was capable of being serious when it came to matters that were important to him. He spent years opposing the practice of sending children to war and dreamed of a shinobi system where a child could be around others his or her age, never needing to grow up prematurely on the battlefield. That end he became very devoted to Konoha upon its foundation, as it was the realization of his dream for peaceful childhoods. He wanted the rest of the village to cherish what Konoha represented just as much as he did, encouraging them to regard every villager as part of one large family that should always look out for each other. As Hokage, his job was to protect that family at all costs, even if that cost was his life. This philosophy, known as the Will of Fire, would become a cornerstone of Konoha teachings for decades after his death. The Will of Fire is demonstrative of Hashirama's general optimism when it came to other people. He believed a village-first loyalty would naturally break down the mentality that shinobi had to look out for their clans. Hashirama lived by this philosophy long before Konoha's founding, having no qualms about killing himself if it meant peace between the Uchiha and Senju clans. In fact, his entire goal of gaining more power was to have enough just to stop violence. One example of this was he believed if the two most powerful clans during the Warring States period were to join forces, there would be no other shinobi clan to stand against them and would stop selling their services, effectively ending the Warring States period. He always saw the best in others, either trusting that they acted in good faith or that they could, through non-violent means, be reasoned with. He was humble, not above lowering his head to his fellow village heads or claiming inferiority to those he'd never met, but whose actions he approved of. If nothing else, Hashirama was kind, placing the needs of others before his own. He was even willing to take his own life if it would help create a world where his friends and family wouldn't need to die unnecessarily. It was on these points that Tobirama disagreed with Hashirama most ardently, as Tobirama felt that Hashirama should have a greater value of himself and a greater suspicion of others. It was, similarly, on these points that Hashirama was at his most forceful, asserting his views over Tobirama's. Though Tobirama did not often agree, he knew better than to oppose his brother. Hashirama is also well balanced on this regard, as he didn't exert his force over Tobirama over past actions that cannot be changed, such as when finding out Tobirama seemingly mistreated the Uchiha, he expressed anger, but didn't exert his force as it didn't do any good. Hashirama had a lifelong friendship and rivalry with Madara Uchiha, eventually considering him a brother. As children, they would spend much of their free time together, talking, playing, and planning for a future that they weren't sure would ever come. Both were willing to oppose their own fathers by refusing to kill each other, but only Hashirama kept up this refusal into adulthood. Even as enemies, Hashirama would go out of his way for Madara, restraining himself and Tobirama so as not to hurt him, and indulging Madara's desires at his own consequence. When they were able to rekindle their friendship by making Konoha, Hashirama placed a great deal of trust in Madara by desiring him to be Hokage, believing it was the best way for Madara to recover from the loss of his brothers. When this ultimately failed, Hashirama respected Madara's opinions and dissatisfaction with the village, but would not permit him to move against Konoha, killing him in the end with sadness and reluctance in order to protect what they'd made together. Despite everything, Hashirama considered Madara his friend to the very end. Hashirama was a tall man with tanned skin and dark eyes. He had waist-length black hair typically styled in a center-parted fringe that framed his face. He often wore the standard shinobi dress of his era, consisting of dark red armor worn over a simple black suit with sandals. This armor was constructed from numerous metal plates, formed into multiple protective guards along his body. Each collar of his shoulder guards bore the Senju symbol. Prior to Konoha's formation, he wore a white-colored cloth bearing his clan's symbol on his forehead, which he later replaced with the village's forehead protector. Upon becoming Hokage, Hashirama tended to wear the traditional Kage attire consisting of the customary maroon and white hat and haori over a full-length maroon and white gown, along with a simple red headband. Otherwise, he wore a light brown, short-sleeved, kimono shirt with mesh armor underneath, held closed by a red sash, and navy blue pants. In his Hokage portrait, he is seen wearing a kerchief. As a child, Hashirama's hair was more bowl-cut in style, hanging around his face. His usual attire consisted of a dark kimono shirt, a short light green jacket with darker green linings, a white scarf around his neck, traditional pinstriped kimono pants of his clan, and a dark green sash around his waist. Abilities. Hashirama was famed as the strongest shinobi of his era and one of the strongest in history, reputed as a god of shinobi. Madara, another legendary shinobi, openly admitted inferiority to Hashirama throughout their entire lifetime together, even with the eternal Manjukum Sharingan and the 9 tails at his disposal. Through his unique powers, Hashirama had been able to subdue and capture 8 of the 9 free-roaming tailed beasts on his own. During the Fourth Shinobi World War, Kabuto proclaimed that the man's might as a ninja was so vast that it was held in a fantasy light similar to the Sage of Six Paths, stating that no one, aside from Madara, had come close to matching him ever since his passing. Ninjutsu. As a Senju, Hashirama is trained in a variety of shinobi skills. He could summon multiple Rashomon gates to protect himself from nearly any attack. He could use barrier ninjutsu advanced enough to subdue the 10 tails. He had unprecedented skill in medical ninjutsu, able to heal wounds without forming hand seals. His skill in Fukinjutsu could store several different types of weapons for battle, with which he showed versatile skill in Bukijutsu, able to fight on par with Madara. In the Anime, he could also break Madara's control over the 9 tails. Hashirama was proficient in all 5 basic nature transformations, along with yin and yang release. He was most famous for his use of wood release, a combination of earth and water natured chakra, creating wood and plants from the ground or his very being of various sizes and shapes that he manipulated to his purposes. This ability was apparently exclusive to him as no one else has naturally acquired this power. Any replications are noticeably pale in comparison to Hashirama's capabilities. Hashirama could completely change the landscape with his constructs. He also had more ingenious usages such as making wood clones that are nearly indistinguishable from himself. He could make flowering trees whose pollen rendered opponents unconscious, protective structures able to withstand tailed beast balls, giant hands to apprehend large targets, as well as a giant humanoid creature able to clash with Madara's complete body, Susanoo. In the Anime, his precision and dexterity with his wood release could wield and launch his various weapons from afar, allowing him to attack from multiple angles. Hashirama's wood release also granted him a method of subduing and controlling the tailed beasts. By making direct hand contact or channeling it through his wood release, Hashirama could use the Hokage-style 60-year-old technique, Kakuin entering society with bliss-bringing hands, to put the beast to sleep. He acquired several tailed beasts in this way and was able to maintain control over all of them at the same time. Likewise, he could create wood dragons to wrap around any targets and absorb their chakra. It was by this power that he earned fame as one of few people who could completely control a tailed beast. Senjutsu. Because of his large chakra reserves, Hashirama could use Senjutsu and enter Sage mode, a feat he could perform instantaneously. In this mode, he gains red, black in the Anime, markings around and under his eyes as well in the middle of his forehead. While it is not known where he learned it, Hashirama proved formidable in its usage, riding about on his wood techniques as a means to be mobile in battle while maintaining the stillness of oneself needed to continue building up natural energy to keep this mode activated. Hashirama could perform powerful seals to bind targets, even those as large as the 10 tails. The power of Sage mode would also greatly augment his wood release, causing his constructs to become considerably larger and more dangerous, as seen with his largest creation, the Sage Art wood release. True several thousand hands, by using it to deliver an enormous barrage of punches, it could strip Susanoo from the 9 tails plus was chiefly responsible for the formation of the Valley of the End.